Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to When We Walk. This is a little podcast where we talk about the questions we all ask as we walk through life. I'm Micah.
And I'm Shireen.
Let's chat.
So I feel like
Yes.
now that we've hit our 40s,
I'm into
you
that.
are
Yeah.
you are mid
Halfway
40s.
through. Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I'm still early 40s. We talk about being old a lot.
It comes up a lot.
It comes.
Yeah.
I've noticed like my reels and the things that get pushed to me on social media are all like more for older people.
Are they really like what?
I don't know.
What do you mean? Like
just
pillows
the
and
jokes. No, like
Oh.
the funny things. So like there's one that I feel like we always send back and forth to friends of like, you know, you're old when you wake up and you forget why you hurt your back or something like that. Your back hurts and you forget why you hurt your back, or your back hurts because you tried to bend down and tie your shoe or something like that. Like all those funny jokes about getting old.
Yeah.
And they're funny.
They come across your screen more often.
They do.
Remember Dustin Nickerson's line on
What was
getting
it?
old? In your 20s, you think you can't get hurt doing anything.
Oh, yeah.
In your 30s, you realize you can get hurt doing anything. In your 40s, you realize you can get hurt doing nothing. Yeah.
That is so true.
So true.
It is true. So it's like those kind of jokes are being fed more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even like, so the ads is what really gets me. It's all like the wrinkle reducer ads and the night creams and the eye creams and all the creams for the ladies.
Interesting.
Do guys get those?
No. I'm trying to think anything.
Yours is like hair replacement and
related stuff. Yeah. It's not as much
know.
image focused. I think it's more guys might get targeted at age based on like income. So like you have money for like nicer clothes now.
Yeah.
So like nicer clothes brands go after
Okay.
you, or nicer shoe brands.
Yeah.
Car brands, things like that. I don't know that I get a lot of like image stuff.
That's so funny. It tells you the difference because it's a little more value
But
for
it might be
guys
what things that I'm interested in. I don't know.
to age and to have the gray hair and to like be wise and, you know, what is it? Like, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just cooler for guys. For women, it's not. You don't want to get old.
Yeah.
And then becomes the tension of the value. We don't value getting old. We don't value old things.
No, we don't.
Like in a culture where we want to stay young and hip and relevant and new.
Yeah.
You want new things. Even to the point of like, I grew up, our whole house was all yours too, all antiques. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I don't even remember
Yeah.
my parents ever going into a normal furniture store. We always went antiquing.
Oh, my parents just anything that was upholstered.
Maybe our couch.
Anything for us, anything that was upholstered got reupholstered.
Oh yeah,
Every
you
few years.
keep
And
everything.
so to this day, my mom still has the same couch.
Just
It's looked like
reupholstered.
5 different ways over the
That is
last
so funny. That's
40
what I'm
years.
saying. So like, it's a different generation. You just throw it out. You get the new thing. And then it feels that way, even like personally, like, oh my gosh, I've got to stay new and fresh and relevant. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of this.
We don't value old.
We don't value old.
value
it
young.
feels like.
We value young.
Yet, wisdom comes as you age.
Yeah.
You grow more as you get older in seasons of life. Anyway, so many thoughts.
There's some interesting writing around this lately, and one thing that comes to my mind is Ronald Rolheiser. I know I talk about him a lot.
You do. You love him.
Sacred Fire, but he talks about the idea that in a culture that values young and looks down upon old, because people are constantly attempting to stay young, the whole society misses out on what age actually brings to a culture, which is wisdom and stability and depth. And so the example of, you know, just say couples who, you know, get to a certain point in their marriage where they're ready to start over again because this is old and boring. We don't
Oh my
get along
gosh.
anymore. We're not
Yes.
happy anymore. So you start fresh. And so with so much divorce and remarriage, what often where society misses out is on seeing what marriage looks like after 30 years or after 40 years or after 50 years, and how beautiful that can be. So there's no longer even that example for people to look to. And so the whole culture actually misses out when we constantly hit the reset button.
Yes. Thinking about that, I saw on social media, there's this account I follow about like, that they just like walk through cities and ask, oh, you're a couple, tell us how long have you been together and your story or whatever. And anytime there's someone who's been married longer than like, or hits 50 years, like an older couple, the question's always, what's your secret? Because we've realized it doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
It is a lost art to stay married for longer, to get into old age and have these values that have stood the test of time and pushed through some hard things. And we've lost that a little bit. And we always want the new because we have it accessible to it all the time. Yeah. And you want the newest ideas, and you want the newest research, and you want the newest things that we think always bring. We think the best
newer is
comes
better
with the new.
Yeah. And so
and we bring that into the church.
It plays out in the church, where we think we always need to be moving forward as a church in order to either stay up with culture, or B, keep people engaged,
be
and keep
relevant,
things interesting. Yes, keep things relevant. And so it's always about what's new. And so from worship standpoint, songs we sing, it's like once we've sung a song a handful of times, it's like, okay, we need something new, because we tell people aren't engaging, or it seems like they are, or maybe they won't. And so we move on to a new song. So there is this like press towards newer is better even in the church, but we lose something huge when we think that way.
Yeah. It's funny. I think we think new leads to progress all the time, when actually there is value in looking back. I always think of scripture when God, how many times does he say, remember?
It's true. Yeah.
Because we are just naturally, we want to move ahead because better is coming. Better must be on the way. And I'm only going to grow if I keep moving forward and only looking forward. Don't look back. The past is I think people think that, right? The past is behind me. It doesn't matter anymore. When actually the past informed so much of the story to where we got to where we did. And that's true for the church too.
Yeah.
And God knew this and tells us all the time, hey, don't forget to look back and remember, because there are things that have happened in the past. There are things that have been done. There are works that I did. There are things that were established that are still important.
Yeah, that's so true. Like faith biblically is often rooted in what has happened. It's the remembrance. Good. It's we don't just put our faith in wishful thinking that God may wind up doing something. We put our faith in what God has done and believing that he can do it again. And so
we have to look back.
Biblically, faith is rooted in what was done. Hope is rooted in what is to come, and love is how we live that out in the present moment.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah.
And so there's a place for all of it.
That just came out of you right here.
There's a place for all of it in the church, for faith, hope, and love. There's a place for the past, the present, and the future to be
but learning how to connect all of them, we're not always good at that.
Not at all. So right now at Lifegate, we're doing kind of something different.
Yep.
We're talking about the Apostles' Creed.
I know.
And going through this, and
which I think it jolted some people when you brought that up.
I got some great feedback and texts from people after the first week of doing it, who were very honest with me to say, like, when you said it at the beginning of the message, I was like, oh my gosh, like, really?
Oh no, are we becoming a liturgical
the new guy.
church?
He's gonna, and by the end of even that first message, like, oh, okay, this is where we're going. And really it's inspired by the idea that in order for us to move forward as a church and for us to stay grounded as a church, we have to see who we've been, where we came from.
Yeah.
And I love the phrase by Rick Warren, the church at its birth is the church at its best. And so good. Going back to Acts, going back to the teaching of the apostles, and the Apostles' Creed just does a great job of summarizing all of that.
History in the early church.
Yeah, like
helpful.
Really trying to recover things that we may have lost along the way is really important. And it doesn't mean we don't stay relevant, and it doesn't mean we don't look to the future. But I do think there's something about in the church us valuing our heritage. And in churches like ours that are that we're non-denominational, we very much are kind of in the moment, moving forward.
We're non-liturgical church.
Non-liturgical, yep. We often don't value our history in the same way that other churches do.
Also, because there might be people who don't understand non-liturgical, explain like a liturgical church.
Yeah,
what would
liturgical
that look like?
church worships through liturgy, which is really prescribed verses and songs, you could say it this way, passages, biblical passages and songs. They teach certain biblical passages following the church calendar, the traditional church calendar throughout the year, beyond just Easter and Christmas, but even as they go through the whole year. And they have different liturgies in place, whether it's songs that they sing, prayers that they pray, and then the passages that they read together. That is a lot more planned out, and it's rooted in church history. And it tends to be a little bit, because a lot of things are memorized, things are stated collectively. It tends to be the type of service that's not as like spontaneous, free-flowing. It's a little bit more structured and scripted.
So like the Catholic Church would be considered kind of high liturgy?
Yeah.
Liturgical?
Yeah.
Maybe?
More so, yep.
Okay.
Some Episcopalian churches are kind of high church, like you said, and some are just a little bit more casual.
And like Methodist, which when I did go to church, like I remember we would say the Apostles' Creed and I guess singing hymns. Does that feel like a little bit more liturgical?
Typically,
okay.
Yeah. And there's like certain hymns you sing at certain times of year that are connected to certain concepts. So that's that.
So there are people who probably grew up in that in our context now who come to Lifegate. And so when they heard we're going to go through the Apostles' Creed, it could have brought up all kinds of feelings.
Yeah.
But then I think there was a group, because I think on the first week we all got up and like said it.
And it was like a roar.
Well, some of it was, but then I thought, I bet there are people in here. I mean, our kids don't know it.
Right.
And there's probably a nice little generation or some people who didn't grow up in any church context who don't know it. So, there is a big difference in liturgy and but there is a benefit to still looking back for a church like ours to look to some of those, right? Because those are rooted in the history of the church.
Yeah. I mean, they're closer to the original source. You know, the Apostles' Creed, for instance, is, it's the teachings that are most clearly associated with the apostles. At least that's kind of the thinking around the Apostles' Creed. And then, so it's not only closer to the original source, but it's also getting back to before things were as diluted maybe as they are today. And so what was kind of the purest version? So you have original source, but you also have kind of the purest version before different cultural movements kind of worked their way into the church. So you had, and there's been a lot of those throughout history. You have in, the 300s when the Christian church became like institutionalized. And that was a good thing on some levels, but a lot of people say it was actually a really bad thing because the church finally got like connected to government and connected to money. And it shifted all kinds of things. And then you have the splitting of the Western church and the Eastern church. And then you have the Protestant Reformation. And then you could go on a lot more specifically and get into a lot of other things.
The denominations and all
so
of that.
When you go all the way back to the beginning, you kind of get to jump over all that stuff and just get back to the starting line.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean there's not things we've gained over the last 2,000 years.
Right.
But it's also good to see where we began.
So what was then the impetus for you of like, let's go back to this kind of ancient understanding of our faith? Because we're not going to read it every week as a church now.
Yep. So I think for me, it was a couple things. One was how do we navigate an increasingly spiritually confusing world.
Yeah.
Where people are hearing a lot of different messages about spirituality, but also a lot of different messages about Christianity. I mean, there's a lot of talk these days about where you stand on this issue or that issue, and where has the historical church stood on, or where should we stand on women in leadership, on sexuality, on gender, on the end times, on, I mean, all of these things. The church has always had a handful of these things it always has to deal with. And, I thought, instead of like trying to just create new language around all of it, what if we just went back to the very beginning and stood on old language, like things that were the most true and the most clear at the very beginning, and then let's build from there.
Which is what you're saying, that is the benefit of looking back. As a church like ours, who does still like the new songs and the new way, like kind of creative new ways. How are we reaching people? How are we worshiping? Yet there is still a benefit to going back to the ancient. At this point, we can say ancient, not just old, right?
Yeah, it's ancient.
It's ancient. And there's benefits for us today to look back to the ancient ways of believers of the church.
There are,
and the practices that they had in place.
Tyler Staton, pastor of Bridgetown Church in Portland, he says the future of the church is ancient. That's something I heard him say.
What do you think
which
he
I thought
meant
was
by
really
that?
cool. Like, if we're going to,
they're a non-liturgical church, I think, right?
Yeah, but I think they probably incorporate liturgy more than we do. Kind of recited prayers and things like that. I think it's, and it really is the essence of this Apostles' Creed thing. I had not even heard him say that until after we were already into this series, but it just was like, oh, this is good. Because if we're going to stand on the things that matter most, if we're going to really believe in the essence of what Jesus invited us into, in the midst of all kinds of increasing pressures in our culture and all kinds of confusion coming at us, then the best place to root our faith is in what it was rooted in the very beginning. Like, the future of the church is ancient. If we're going to still be alive tomorrow, we've got to hold on to what we believed at the beginning.
Because those are the things that have kept the church going for
100%.
So many years.
And where those things have been forsaken, forgotten, or rejected throughout the history of the church has died.
Oh, wow. That'll speak right there.
Yeah.
So what does that mean then for, two things, for a church like ours, who is still like looks to new things, and then just the average believer who like might not incorporate or even know church history, or like, what does that even mean? Yeah.
So I think on a more individual level, I'll say this, like, I like to read the Bible differently every year.
Yeah.
Like, I have a goal to read the Bible in a particular way every year, but it has to change for me. If I do the same thing every time, then it just kind of gets like, I know in January I read this, in February I read this. And so I like to think of something new, a new way to do it. And what I've been discovering lately is some of the best new stuff is actually old stuff.
Interesting.
Like it's new to me. Okay. Like a used car would be new to me. Like it's a new way for me to read the Bible, but it's been around for a long time. Okay. And so let's like cultivate what we have been creating over the last couple of years. Like the rule of life is an ancient concept that's been around for 1,500 years. We call it now the life trellis. A framework,
kind of new packaging.
Yeah, new packaging, but the same concept and the idea of like intentionally organizing your life around certain spiritual practices. That's all it is. Intentionally organizing your life around certain spiritual practices. The church has been doing that for at least 1,500 years, if not way before that, just not as recorded as clearly as it began, probably in the time of Benedictine monks and all that, Saint Benedict. But it's an ancient thing that I think has a lot of relevance for today because our world is so scattered. Like, we need to get back to intentionally ordering our lives because social media and our commitments and the busyness of life and all the information flying at us and all like expectations and obligations, all of that, like we live so frantically that we're just being shaped and formed by whatever comes at us. If we could recover this ancient thing called a life trellis and begin to intentionally order our lives around particular practices, we would actually find things Jesus came to offer us that we're currently lacking. Things like peace and the ability to hear his voice and the space in our lives to connect with his love for us. And so, I know.
So that is one way to kind of go back and remember the things that kind of old church leaders, people did, other Christians did, that helped them through their cultural moment as well.
Yeah, and that have worked.
Yeah, they worked. That's the other thing.
At all times, in all cultures, to all types of people.
Yeah.
These things are proven.
Yes.
So let's not forget them.
But it's hard to, I think, even in our context, in our culture, to even find that because everyone thinks newer, the newer ideas, the newer discoveries are better. And so to even find them, so how do people like go back and find stuff like that would be kind of helpful in their, as a believer? Like, do you have to go read history books? Do I need to go and learn about the history of the church? And like, how does that work?
Yeah, I will say for me, going to seminary like later in life, in my late 30s instead of my early 20s, actually I think like this was the wisdom of God, because I think I valued some stuff that I learned in my late 30s that I might not have valued in my early 20s. And a lot of it was, you do get into some good church history, and you just begin to see like the different battles the church had to fight over the years and the different things they divided over and the different insights they gained that they really stood on and kind of established. So I think church history is a great thing, but I don't think you have to like get a bunch of big, thick books.
Okay.
And I think there are ways to draw from who we've been as a church that can deepen your faith. It's
just funny to even hear you think of that. I was thinking like, if you grow up in the U.S., you grow up studying American history, and even more so, anytime like political season rolls around, I think we all go back a little bit of like, wait, why do we do the government this way? And then you go back and you like try to remember what you learned back in the day, because it does inform. But it's funny, as believers, we don't really learn our Christian history and heritage that really could inform. I mean, besides scripture, that is, that does help inform us. But I'm saying like church practices or, that kind of thing. Like, we don't always do that, but like maybe we should. I've heard people say, I don't know who it was, maybe you remember, that I've heard certain pastors say they read like an ancient kind of early church father type book, like back in the day. Like, I don't know who it would be, but like I've read Teresa of Avila, like some of her stuff, which is very hard to read, people from like the 1500s, turns out. But there are a lot of people who rewrite those and put it in our language. Super helpful. So like reading a thinker, early church leader from a long time ago, and then also new things too. So like not only reading newer leaders, newer ideas, but reading some older ones too, that could be helpful.
It can. So recently a good friend of mine who is a very devout, well-informed, sincere Catholic who comes to church here and goes to Mass on Saturday nights. As I was began teaching through the Apostles' Creed, he brought me a 3-volume set of the teaching of the early church fathers.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so I can't wait to get into it. And it's got references, so you don't have to just like read it from start to finish. There's like, it's broken down by topic and things like that, but I can go find out like, what did Augustine have to say about this? What did Polycarp have to say about this? And what did Origen have to say about this? So really neat. And in the Catholic Church, they do that a little bit better than a lot of more churches kind of in non-denominational world like us do. So I would say, going back to your original question, I never really answered it. So how do you find this stuff? There's a lot of stuff on the internet right now. There's stuff everywhere, social media everywhere. It's accessible. the Bible Project does an amazing
do.
job, and they don't so much get into church history. But they do such an amazing job in how they teach the Bible that tries to go back to what did this mean to its original readers, and therefore, how does it apply to us today? And so they really try to get back to what did this originally mean? And that, I think we have to, we can recover there. I think there are places like Practicing the Way, what John Mark Comer is doing, what Rich Villodas is doing with the Rule of Life. There's actually kind of this whole emerging movement around spiritual practices right now. They're not really hard. It's not hard to find. I mean, there are a lot of people.
I still don't know that the mainstream church talks about it as much, but I do think it's kind of emerging. But I also think it's because there are, because the 90s had that wave of all these big mega churches with, more free worship, kind of a little similar to what we do here. There is kind of a wave of a younger generation moving back to liturgical style churches that are going back to Episcopal or Anglican or even their Catholic roots maybe, because they're finding some new life in those ancient practices. It's what we're saying. There is still a draw to the roots of Christianity that speak to who we are today. And so I think some people, so it could even be good if you're interested, maybe just go to a liturgical church and just read the things that they're reading or the hymns that they're singing or the prayers they're praying, and kind of let it inform some new life into even what you do. Yeah. I love those books that we have, Every Moment Holy. Yeah. I think those are great. Yeah. They are liturgies.
It's a new liturgy.
But they're new liturgies. Yeah. And they're prayers, basically. And they do something, they're prayers outward, but they're also edifying to your soul and spirit of a reminder and a connection to God in a language that's still current, but a connection to Scripture and kind of an ancient practice that just quiets you and connects you in a way I think that's special and different than just, singing a new worship song or something.
That's true. Yeah, and I think one of the real kind of things to highlight in this whole conversation is when something feels dead, it doesn't mean the thing is dead.
Oh, that's good.
It can mean just our ability to engage with it in a life-giving way, in a faith-filled way, has died. So people could say, well, the Apostles' Creed is dead because we said it at our church every single Sunday morning. And it was drudgery and nobody's heart was in it. And it was just quoting the thing. And I get that. It doesn't mean the Apostles' Creed is dead truth. It means that for whatever reason, that congregation, their hearts weren't in it anymore.
It had become mundane. Yeah. It had become so familiar. We get comfortable with the familiar.
Yep. And so I think there's this place in spiritual formation where repetition actually causes things to go deeper if we remain wholehearted in our engagement with it. But at the same time, we always need to be looking for the fresh and the new, because God's word and God's spirit is living and active, and it's always doing something new and different as well. And so I think that's where the beauty of it all comes alive. And when people have kind of embraced one thinking or the other, we have to just embrace the old ways because that's all there is. Or just do the new because it's fresh and different and it makes me feel better. Yeah. But there's a place in the church.
Dead. Yeah.
Yep. There's a place in the church to say, I know we value the old and the new. They both offer something to our spiritual formation in the same way that we talked about at the very beginning. In a culture that values both the young and the old,
yes,
that culture will be more fully developed.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so good. So getting old, first of all, is okay.
It's a thing. Yes. You still have something to offer the world.
We still have something to offer the world with all our wrinkles and gray hair and whatever. But
for sure. And if you are in a place right now spiritually where you're saying, man, the things that I'm doing feel kind of dead.
Yeah.
Look for some new stuff. And one of the best places to look for some new stuff might be looking at the old stuff.
You may have to heed God's words of remember. See what that does for your spirit.
Yep.
That's good.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us on When We Walk today. We can't wait to be with you next time.